When OpenAI put out GPT 5.6, they didn't just put out a new model. They put out 3. But they didn't just put out 3 new models either. They also put out 2 new reasoning levels. They added Max and Ultra as options you can use in tools like Codex. And I'm here to tell you something about those options. As good as OpenAI makes them sound here, saying that it's the highest capability setting, coordinating multiple agents across parallel work streams, I'm here to tell you that they're kind of lying. Not because Ultra is bad, because Ultra isn't a reasoning level. It is also bad, which we'll talk about plenty, don't worry. But the thing I want to make sure is clear is that Ultra is probably not what you think it is. But also, it is bad. I am incredibly frustrated with the way Ultra has been rolled out, both because it was not available to me during my early access testing, so I had to build all my familiarity with it in the last few days, and also because it's caused a ton of confusion to people who are trying to use these models the best they possibly can. And ready for the most unexpected twist here? I blame Anthropic for all of this. OpenAI as well for shipping something that doesn't work, but Anthropic are the ones who started this trend that is not very good and is misleading people like you and I into using things incorrectly and not really knowing how to talk about them. I have a bunch of questions I want to answer in this video. What is Ultra? Why is it bad? How can it be fixed? And most importantly, what the fuck is going on with Codex? Because I am at the point where I am now using 5.6 Sol in other harnesses. Specifically, here I am using it in Claude code. I want to do my best to break down what's going on and why I'm making all these changes after a real quick break for today's sponsor. There's a weird contradiction I've been noticing with AI. On one hand, it benefits greatly from having access to things on the internet, but on the other hand, thanks to AI and all of the scraping that's been going on, most of the websites and sources that I need to get that info from have locked down and are nearly impossible to access. If only there was a really good open source solution that would allow your agents to access data in formats they understand from all over the web. Oh, is it on the screen? Yeah, Firecrawl is that. They built all the open source tooling your agents need to get data out of the web, and they also offer a super generous hosting platform for doing it yourself. I know most of us aren't reading outputs from APIs anymore, but they really are this simple. You put in a URL, and what you get back is a markdown version of the page, a JSON version of the page, as well as a screenshot of the page's content. They have SDKs for pretty much everything you're already using, and if not, you can always curl or use their CLI, which honestly, the CLI has really, really impressed me. Once you paste an API key, you can just tell your agents about it, and it'll give them access to info they might not have otherwise had access to. And the result is super simple markdown that your agents can actually understand and use for things. If all they offered was this direct URL scraping, it would already be one of the most useful things in my toolbox, but they offer way more. They have general search for finding things on the web that you might not already have a URL for, as well as interaction for when you want to actually do things on a page. My favorite, though, is the monitoring feature. Monitor lets you get notified when something changes on a page, like maybe a price goes down or a release happens or an early access thing comes through. It's so useful for you and your agents to know when things change on the web. And as great as the API is, not every tool can use it, but you know what they can use? An MCP server. Do you know how useful this is for ChatGPT and Codex as well as every other tool ever? It's incredible. 2 more really quick things they wanted me to make sure you know. The first is that you can use this without even having an API key. It's just free. You'll hit limits eventually, at which point you can go add an API key, but it's insane how generous all of these tiers are. You get a ton for no money. And if you do need some money, they can help with that too, because they're currently hiring. So if this is interesting, hit them up. Give the whole web to your agents at soydev.link/firecrawl. First and foremost, let's start with what is Ultra. I'll start in the terminal so I can show you when you select the model that Ultra is presented here as a reasoning level. You have low, medium, high, extra high, max, and Ultra. If you use the ChatGPT app, formerly known as the Codex app, they did an interesting thing here where it starts at the bottom as Terra Light, then it goes to Sol Light, then Sol Medium, Sol High, Sol Extra High. This is a change. It was going to Ultra before, and I think they actually listened to me and they hid Ultra from that slider. I shouldn't have installed the update I just installed because before I installed the update, Ultra was at the end of this list. I have told OpenAI verbatim multiple times now that Ultra should never have been included the way it was in this selector. It even had a fancy purple gradient it would do when you did it before. I'm thankful they killed that because that was the biggest mistake. Why is it a mistake? It's because Ultra isn't a reasoning level. I'll explain the easiest way I know how to, which is with Claude Code. Not because I'm going to ask it to explain, but I want to show you what happens when you do /effort. You have options here. Low, medium, high, X high, max, and ultra code. Ultra code. Ultra code. I wonder if there's some overlap here. Ultra code was a pretty cool feature in Claude Code, but you'll notice underneath here, Ultra code says X-High plus workflows. If you haven't been keeping up with my recent pro Claude Code arc, this is the big part of why. It's workflows. Ultra code isn't workflows, but it's a way to trigger them. The more important piece to look at here is the other thing it says underneath, which is X-High. Your options are high, X-High, max, with the fancy little gradient on the text there, but then Ultra code does the super fancy gradient. Silly. Watch at the top here. I currently have Fable 5 with high effort selected. So when I press enter here, it's going to change that to Ultra, right? Nope. It changes it to Fable 5 with X-High effort, and Ultra code is just a state in the bottom. The reason for that is that Ultra code isn't a reasoning level. Ultra code is a skill, and Ultra is 2. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that it's the same as when you do a / command to pull in a skill, where it takes the content of that markdown file and it appends it to the system prompt, so it's there when the next message comes through. The reason they do this is they want to make it easier to trigger subagents. Ultra and Ultra code are both instructions for the model to use way more subagents. In Claude Code, this works through workflows, and in Codex, it works through the agent implementations called V1 and V2, which I will crash out about momentarily, don't worry. I just wanted to make sure that we understood this first and foremost. Ultra isn't a reasoning level. It's effectively a toggle that turns on a change in your system prompt, telling the model to do more subagents. As much as I love to give Anthropic shit, they did mostly get this right. It's a little too easy to leave Ultra code on, which isn't great, but as an implementation with the system prompt change and specifically the default to X-High effort, not to max, when you go to Ultra, the reasoning level is lower than it was on max. Again, when I go to /effort, low, medium, high, X-High, max, Ultra. And the thing that's unintuitive is that Ultra code actually points at X-High, not at max. This is not what Codex does. Sorry, this is not what ChatGPT does. I also can't help but notice they are hiding the max option now. They're listening to me. It's fun seeing in real time OpenAI making changes based on the things that I'm shouting about on the internet. But Ultra is still hidden here under effort, where it never should have been in the first place. When we click it, you'll see all of these other changes. Under the hood, Ultra is using max reasoning levels, which is absurd because max reasoning burns tokens. I talked about this a bit in my previous cost savings video, but the TLDR is that max does up to 2 times more token burn than X-High or high. Depending on the bench, it's between 4% and 10% better at more than 2x the cost. So I don't think max makes sense almost ever. But Ultra isn't max. Ultra is nearly infinitely recursive maxes, which means it burns tokens. This is the primary reason Ultra is bad. The problem is that the parent agent and all of the subagents are set to max reasoning. Well, Theo, this is an easy fix. Just tell the parent agent, the top level, to spin up the subagents on a lower reasoning level. I'll have more to say on this in a bit, but the TLDR for now is that the version of subagents that Sol uses does not currently allow for selection of reasoning levels. So if you have Ultra set, all of the children subagents spawned are also going to be Ultra. I crashed out pretty hard about this on Twitter, going as far as to say that Claude Code is far ahead. At the very least, they should give me an interim solution where I can hard set subagent reasoning levels. The current implementation is so bad that I think it has caused this perception shift where people think that the new models are way less efficient and will destroy your rate limits. The new models won't do that. At least with a little bit of careful use, they won't do that. Ultra absolutely will. I blew my first 5-hour limit in 20 minutes. Using Ultra on fast mode because I didn't know how much crazier it would be. Instantaneously evaporated my limit. I burned a manual reset and I evaporated again another 40 minutes. I hit the 5-hour limit twice in under an hour, all because I had one Ultra run going. Hitting your 5-hour limit in 20 minutes is bad, but what would be much worse is hitting your weekly limit in an hour and a half, which is dangerously possible right now because OpenAI is temporarily removing the 5-hour limit due to people hitting it too fast. This is a good change overall, but if you're using Ultra, it's a little scary because previously that 5-hour limit being hit is almost a warning, like a, hey, be careful, you're going to overuse this and lose your weekly limit. And since the 5 hours like 20 to 25% of your weekly, you would only lose 20 to 25% of your weekly usage. With this change, it is very much possible that Ultra could nuke your whole week. So be careful. I'm realizing now that the order of events I planned here isn't actually going to make a lot of sense, so I'm going to move how it can be fixed to be after my rant about the current state of Codex. Oh boy. So, as I said, the Subagent's version being used doesn't expose the necessary functionality. What do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is that there are two versions of Subagents in Codex right now, labeled V1 and V2 internally. The Codex CLI, which is what powers the Codex desktop app, is open source, so we can actually look through the code here. I have 5.6 Sol in Codex and Claude Code breaking down how the Subagent implementations work so that we can compare based on their findings. Codex finished first. I'll look at Claude codes for the difference in a minute. I had them both going through the actual code base to try and break up the difference between these implementations. Obviously, LLM speak, so we'll get through it and I will do my best to clean it up. V1 is like a dispatcher hiring temporary helpers by ticket number. V2 is like a named project team with an org chart and mailboxes. Good enough. V1 is very much a simple tool call that is a way the model can trigger another sub-model to go do something. So let's say you tell the model to go review 3 PRs. It can spin up 3 subagents, one for each PR, with the instructions to go do that one thing. And then when they're done, they'll all send up their findings, and that top-level agent will decide what to do from there. Side note, this page is ugly as sin. I have things to say about that soon, don't worry. But it starts here with 5 definitions worth knowing. They refer to the parent agent as the root agent. I think that's fine. Then there is the subagents, which are the things spawned by that root agent. Subagents can also spawn themselves. We'll have to deal with that in a bit. Then there is the context, which is all of the info that the top-level agent and the subagents have. Usually, subagents are spawned by writing a new prompt or summarizing the stuff going on in the main thread so that the subagent has a limited set of context. Remember that, because there are things going on here. The mailbox is a new concept in the V2 implementation where there are messages for the team, as well as the ability to send messages between different agents. And then there is slots, which is the number of agents that can be running, and the shared workspace, which is the files the agents are working on. This does not need to be in here. This is not a great description. What a surprise. At the very least, it made decent diagrams here. With V1, you have that root level agent, and it can spawn sub-agents to do specific things that return a result when they're done. V2 is a complete overhaul where the different sub-agents can talk to each other and spawn sub-agents of their own. This sound familiar? Remember that infinite recursion thing I was talking about with Ultra? Yeah, there's a problem though. V1 is the finished implementation. This is what Codex uses by default, and V2 is an overhaul that they are still working on. It's still a work in progress. V2 is very much unfinished, and if you turn it on, you get errors for having V1 at all, especially if you have anything changed about V1, like custom limits, custom instructions, whatnot. You can't have V1 and V2 on at the same time. Until now, because there's a really, really annoying exception. In the models cache JSON file, which is the file that Codex uses to determine which models are available to you, there's a new field they added, multi-agent version, which is V2 for Sol and Terra, and V1 for everything else. So now it doesn't matter what you have configured or if you've manually opted into V2, the new models are always routing to V2. But V2 has some other quirks. With V1, Codex had access to this handful of tools for spawning, sending, waiting, closing, and resuming subagents. They would create a separate thread effectively with its own context for the agent to go do its thing and then respond when it's done. The parent would wait for the agents to complete and then summarize whatever it got back. V2 is quite different because now it is breaking down tasks instead of just subagents. An agent requires a task name. A root child named research becomes /root/research. Its tests become /root/research/tests. So this is a path-based naming scheme for agents to spawn subagent layers. But the biggest issue for me is the way it handles context sharing. By default, all of the history in your main thread is going to be shared to all of the subagents. Spoiler, this is really fucking stupid. While 5.6 is way better at not falling for context pollution where some bad thing in the history affects how it behaves, it still does. This also is a massive increase in cost because the subagents now have way more context. I would assume that part of why they did this is to keep the cache consistent between the parent agent and the subagents, but I'm also pretty sure there are changes in the system prompt which is slightly higher, therefore busting the cache. Not positive about that, but I would be surprised. Either way, getting one cache right at the start of a new subagent thread is far from a high cost. I think it's stupid to try and preserve cache between the root agent and the subagents. So yeah, dumb. I don't like this at all. As I said, by default, it now takes all of your turns in all of the history when it goes to that subagent, but you can set different amounts to share, like none, or a number like 3. And as I said, the default is the full history, which I think is really dumb. It also filters out the tool calls, so that breaks cache. Where things start to get really weird is this idea of mailboxes. Instead of just having a subagent go do some work and then respond when it's done, they now can send typed messages between each other. Send message queues a note. Follow-up task gives an idle helper more work and can start its next turn. This allows for the parent agent to send additional work down to an existing subagent when it decides it wants more done. This is one of those things where it does genuinely sound really, really cool. In reality, mixed results. The finished work is routed to the direct parent, so again, if they're nested, tests sends its results to research, which sends its results to root. Yeah. And waiting no longer means wait till it's done. It means wait till we get a message back. The root agent can also list all of the subagents and even interrupt them if for some reason it wants to. If it got info from another subagent, it's like, oh, that thing probably doesn't matter anymore. I can kill that. There is no depth limit in V2, so it could spawn infinitely nested subagents, but it can only run 4 at a time by default, which I had changed, which is a big part of how I hit crazy usage so quickly. Random observation, I did run this prompt on both Codex and Claude Code. Claude Code took a bit longer. Again, I was using 5.6 Sol on both. If you feel like this design's a little bloated, you're not the only one. I love this message from JKF here. It sounds like too many people designed Subagents V2 and caused it to be bloated. I agree. I don't really like the design of V2, and I didn't use it much when I was testing 5.6 Sol because, again, they hadn't added this change where it would default route to V2. I did turn it on manually near the end of my testing out of curiosity, and I noticed it would work a lot longer. Didn't get far enough on real work to really see a difference in the quality of the output, but it definitely goes a lot longer and spins up a lot more. Don't necessarily love that, but it can. All of that said, I've been using it more since, and I'm not really impressed with the quality of the work and output I get from V2 with the current settings and setup in Codex. While I do love the ability to spawn subagents to break up work and control the context a bit more, the changes to how context is managed and the changes to how messages are passed makes this noisier, is the simplest I can put it. And it also burns way, way, way more tokens as a result. And this leads us to our final question of how can it be fixed? I know this stuff scares a lot of people. Like, they're afraid if they don't get it right initially, they might miss out on this opportunity. They might fall behind all these things. And a lot of you guys are trying so hard to stay on top of the best solutions. If you're here out of fear and not out of excitement and curiosity, the only thing I want you to take from this is that you should just wait a bit. The current implementation is bad and has rough edges, but the OpenAI team is incredible at taking feedback. I have been shocked as I film at just how many of the things I'm complaining to them about have been addressed between the 6-ish hours ago where I sent the complaint on Slack and now when it's not there anymore. If you just wait a little bit, these things will improve. Continuing to use the defaults and trusting that these companies will get it figured out eventually, you'll be fine. It's not that big a deal. I know I am crashing out hard about this, but I want you to realize this is because I am a hardcore nerd who cares too much and is just digging into the details because they want to. You don't have to do this to stay ahead. You can just use the tools as they work by default, and they are still really good. With all of that said, I think OpenAI needs to rethink how they do subagents. As I mentioned before, Ultra in Codex is a pretty blatant copy of Ultra code in Claude Code, at least in how it is meant to work, where it's added to the reasoning effort slider. It is meant to trigger subagents and be a way to force subagents on. It basically just appends to the system prompt, please, please, please use subagents. But in Ultra on Codex, it is doing that through these weird subagent tools like we've seen many times before. In Claude Code, it's using workflows. I've talked about workflows a bunch before in my Claude Code is Good video, and I plan to talk about them even more in my ClaudeX video, where I show how I'm using 5.6 Sol in Claude Code directly, not as a subagent or a thing that Claude Code calls, literally as the model inside of Claude Code directly. It's way better than I thought it would be. The reason I'm doing this is workflows. To put it simply, workflows are a way to programmatically define a bunch of subagent stuff. In Claude Code, you can actually save the file it writes because it's making a JavaScript file to do this work. It's just by defining a meta, which is a name, a description, and different phases, because it has stages throughout its work. It then has schemas, which are the typed outputs that each of the phases should have. It then writes a prompt, and this is programmatic. So if it wants to insert things programmatically, use a map or some type of loop to add context in and do different steps, it can, because it is just code. Once this is all defined, it can call the different phases. Sorry to my editor phase as I'm talking about phases. I'm sure that won't be confusing at all. So it starts phase reviewing. It defines reviews as a bunch of parallel agents. We have the first one here, which is a hard-coded prompt. Your assigned perspective is 5.6 Sol at high reasoning effort. Label, review 5.6 Sol, phase reviewing, model 5.6 Sol, effort high, schema, review schema, agent type, general purpose. And we do the same here with another one that's using Terra as well. And then one here using Fable, because I asked it to use all three of these. Once this phase is completed, because remember, we awaited it up here. I know, crazy, we're reading code in a Theo video again. It starts the synthesizing phase, where it awaits another agent call, where it is passed these review results as a JSON blob that's been stringified. And now another agent using Fable 5 on high is going to process all of the data it was given and respond following the synthesis schema. And this is how you can programmatically use subagents. All of the stages are defined ahead of time, and depending on what the outputs of a given stage are, or a given agent run are, it can decide if it should put the results in another run in another subagent in a different stage. This one is really, really simple because there was only two phases. There's the review phase and the synthesizing phase. I've had many more complex ones though. I've had some that had 12 plus phases. Here's one that had 5. It was research, verify, synthesize, critique, and finalize. Each of those got a schema for how the output should be formatted. It was given a common prompt to append to the top of all of them because all of them need to know what the directory is and a bit of other information. It created these different topics that are keys and prompts for different things that we'll be doing throughout. It then starts the research phase. It goes through and defines multiple subagents to do all of that. It clears out any that didn't have an actual response in case that happens, but you can also filter based on a given field. Like if you had a field in the response that was should keep researching true or false, or needs another review, or needs follow-up, or solves problem, whatever it decides to put in here, it can now use that content to determine where to pass off the work next, because it is code. The problem with most subagent implementations is that they're leaning too hard into tool calls. They work because the model will spit out a call spin up subagent with this information, and then it does it, and then it does another tool call for another, and then it does it, and then it does it again, where the agent has to keep all of this context itself and spin everything up as part of the LLM's work. With workflows, it's hard-coded, but it's hard-coded on the fly. Previously, subagents were just full-on hard-coded, where certain harnesses, cough, cough, oh my pie, cough, cough, open code, had hard-coded subagent descriptions, like this is a researcher subagent, it does these things. This is an implementer subagent, it does these things. Workflows is a really cool in-between where on the fly it will create these different subagent types and classes and what they're expected to return with, and then create a flow, a workflow, if you will, where each stage is determined based on what happened on the fly with code that was written ahead of time. This does a few things really well, but the biggest it does is it kind of puts a hard cap on when this all ends. Instead of just going forever, which is really possible with Codex's Ultra implementation, there's a fixed number of phases, so eventually it will get to the end. It might spin up a shitload of subagents in one field. For example, if you ask it to read 3 files and find things that are worth fixing, it might find 72 things to fix in the first file, and it might spin up 72 subagents in the next section, the next phase, where it is fixing the things that it finds. That's fine though, because it will eventually get to the end always. Ultra is much more likely to just go forever because it ends when the agents decide to end, not when the code is completed. So what I'm trying to say is I think OpenAI copied the wrong parts. They copied the UX, which was bad, where they disguised it as a reasoning level where it isn't. And they didn't copy the implementation, which is good because workflows are an awesome way to break up work programmatically. They are so awesome that I'm causing problems for a lot of people because of it. And I have a whole dedicated video coming up about my usage of 5.6 Sol in Claude Code. It's probably going to be the next video I post. So make sure you subscribe and hit that bell if you want to see it as soon as it drops. I think you'll be surprised. Spoiler, I'm going to spend the majority of this video crashing out about the system prompt in Codex because it is so much worse than I thought it would be. One last thing, shout out to Maria for making this awesome demo of what the model selector should look like in Codex. Sorry, ChatGPT. You have the different models and different effort levels, but you also have Ultra as a switch on the side. Because again, Ultra isn't an effort level. Ultra is a skill. And it seems like everybody from Thibaut to Dominic to even GDB himself agrees that, as silly as this is, something like this does make sense. So for now, don't use Ultra. If you really want to get this type of thing, keep an eye out for my video on how to use workflows in Claude Code with GPT 5.6 Sol, because even Thibaut supports my chaos here. Hope this was helpful, and until next time, peace nerds.